AAUP has been addressing this situation for some time. In fact, they started their shared governance conference. Did any of you participate in that?
No.
But if you could still tell us something.
Yeah, we meet regularly. In fact, we're meeting this afternoon. We meet regularly, and we're a like-minded group of faculty who try to support the Faculty Senate and try to lobby where we can. You know, it's our job to look at issues, to raise issues, and to speak for faculty. We sometimes are seen as more troublemakers, which is unfortunate because we don't see ourselves like that. We see ourselves actually looking at a number of issues, and oftentimes these issues, are in opposition to, what the administration can do sometimes. But we're part of a state AAUP, which is part of a national AAUP. State AAUP had shared governance meeting just a couple of weeks ago, and I was out of state and couldn't attend, but it meets again in the spring, and I have intentions of being at that meeting as well. But we're looking at a number of issues. Academic freedom is our primary one. I mean, that's why we exist. We were actually have been an organization since 1915, and it started basically over an issue where a Stanford professor, Edward Ross, was fired by Mrs. Leland Stanford, who was the wife of the railroad magnate, Leland Stanford. And he was fired because she didn't like his economic policies as they related to workers and as they related to the railroad industry. And he was not free to then speak and publish the way he wanted to. And a few years later, John Dewey and others formed the AAUP, and it's been in existence since 1915. And most universities of our size have chapters. And we are considered the watchdogs of academic freedom for faculty to be able to think and do their work, with protection.
Now, since this issue affects students so much, however, there is hardly any noise from the student sector. Why is that, you think? And what can students possibly do to address the deteriorating condition of their education?
To be active in their Student Government Association, and Student Government Association sits at the Faculty Senate as well, and as a vote. That students need to listen to these things carefully and to interact with faculty to get at the underlying reasons for why things are happening, and then they need to communicate this to others, to the student bodies. But even then, students are transitory. They're here for 3, 4, 5 years, and then they're gone. They don't see what we see over a period of time. We don't know. They don't know what Georgia Southern looked like 10 years ago, even 6 years ago, or what it will look like, actually in the future. So it's our job as faculty members, to kind of have their backs when it comes to certain things, class sizes among them, as we've discussed.
That's one issue where the student, I don't know about student government, quite honestly, but I know the student newspaper, Georgian, has been interested. They've talked to me a time or two on the issue of class sizes and faculty-student ratio. And our faculty-student ratio has been going up constantly. The students notice this, and they're sitting there going, how can a faculty member handle this growing number of students and still do the same job? And it's pretty obvious to them, and I think it's probably pretty obvious to them too, that just innovating isn't going to solve this problem. That's one where there is some interest, but I suppose there isn't enough agitating. And one of the reasons for that might be the rising costs. And they also know that in order to solve that issue is going to cost money. And So maybe they're sitting there going, well, I'll just keep my mouth shut. And that way I won't have to put out so much money, or my parents won't have to put out so much money. But an analogy that I have made before is, if you can't look at the university as though it's a business. It is a different beast. If you go to the dentist, do you want the dentist to tell you everything's fine, just pokes around a little bit? Even if the dentist looks in there and sees that you've got some real problems, and that 6 months or a year down the line, you're going to be in some real pain, you're going to be losing teeth, and it's going to cost some money, and it's going to take some time and some visits to fix that problem. Do you want the dentist who just goes, hey, everything's fine, here's a cheap bill, don't have to bother coming back? Or do you want a dentist who looks in there and goes, okay, we can work on that, going to take some time, going to take some money? Which kind of dentist do you want to go to? Yeah, you use freezing. Painless dentistry, painless. But what we have right now is a situation where people are demanding that first kind. And that is students, that is parents, that is taxpayers, that is legislators, that is administrators who say all you have to do is innovate. And somebody's got to step up and go, we're all going to be toothless, uneducated morons in the future if we keep going on like this. They can agitate. They can push. Push the administration, push the taxpayers, push their parents, push the legislators.
Do you think this has to do with the amount of information that students are given? For example, our faculty-student ratio has gone up, while the large-scale, small-field tag has stayed on. And people come here with that impression.
Well, what you have to do is ask the right questions, and we are starting to learn that as faculty. When we had the raise the motion on a moratorium for administrators, we had to ask the right question a dozen times until we found out that, yes, indeed, we were hiring far more administrators than we were faculty. Well, students have to do the same sort of thing. They have to ask the right questions, because when you look at Georgia Southern's class size, average class size, it doesn't look that bad, but that's not it. Ask the average student class size at the freshman year, in core classes, in the sophomore year, and then ask about it in certain majors, that are popular, because the average is influenced by technology, for instance, and engineering, which have much smaller class sizes. Those averages get fitted into there. But I think that the average class size for most students is actually much, much higher.
And I want to toss something in here. The Senate Executive Committee, basically via my wife, Candy Shilley, who's on that committee, has asked a question about core class sizes. And Provost Bartel said, A, it would be hard to break that out. B, instead, let's get the numbers for all of our classes. The information will be in there, and gathering that information will be an effort that also has other applications. Here's a situation where a Senate query was looked at by the provost, give her, gold stars for this one, looked at by the provost and went, that's a good idea. Let's take it about 10 yards farther too. And so we hope to have some information that all of us can work with in short order. It's taken them a while to get this information together. But that is one of the things, as you say, that we're going to see, is this huge disparity in the class sizes. And here's another thing about a lot of those lower level class sizes. Mike kind of talked about the issue of tenure earlier. Increasingly, we are having a professoriate that does not have tenure. And these people are teaching more sections. And generally, it's more sections of those introductory classes, the ones that get people geared up for the higher level classes. So you've got people teaching 4 or 5 of these classes. In the case of a temporary, teaching 5 classes, where a tenured professor is teaching 3 or 4, depending upon the discipline. My discipline is 3 or 4. They're teaching 5 of them, and of the biggest classes. So that you can have a temporary whose students, each student is sharing that temporary professor with 300 or 400 other students. That's not a great deal of time that that professor can devote to that individual student. Period. There just isn't the time. And hopefully we'll have some data on that.
Well, nationally, the number of full-time temporary faculty is 50%. That's what it is now. So these are faculty who are untenured. These are faculty who are at the bottom of the pay scale, and these are the faculty who are teaching the most students and the most sections of students. And we are not at 50% at Georgia Southern, but we are seeing an increase and have been seeing an increase as most institutions. If you went to the University of Georgia, those full-time temps would not be full-time temps, although they have a number of them. They would be graduate assistants. Now, we make the claim that we don't use very many graduate assistants, that in your classrooms you get a regular professor. And for the most part, I mean, that is true. They're hired as a regular professor, but we've got to remember that in the hierarchy of faculty, they're at the lowest level in terms of a regular professor. Go ahead.
And as Mark pointed out, there's a growing percentage of the teaching faculty that is on this kind of temporary contract. And as Mark pointed out, they are not given conditions to do their job properly. It's not a question of competence, it's that the conditions are put in, it is not possible to do their job properly. This is not a problem specific to Georgia Southern at all. In fact, I think there are many places where the situation is worse in that respect, in terms of the percentage of temporary faculty and so on.
And temporary faculty have even less reason to see themselves as stakeholders and to be utterly siloed, as I talked about earlier, and the impact that has on their students. Their students are only product because they can only be product given the situation for those individuals.